Yeah,
Friends, good evening. It's indeed my pleasure to have two of my very, very good friends joining us on very interesting conversations around the educational policy in India. So, if we are to look at the profiles of both our guests today, so starting with KO. KO is an educational entrepreneur. I mean, a term which in India is considered to be an oxymoron because you're not supposed to be an entrepreneur in the space of education for whatever good or bad reason. That's another area of, I think, discussion which we will have. And KO runs a wide variety of schools, be it the Indian CBSE school or the Pakistani school or the Delhi public school or the Canadian international school or the American international school, and it runs by far the largest educational conglomerate out of Kuwait, and and hails from a very respectable family from the region. So, Keo, welcome. It's indeed our pleasure and honor to have you discussing this with us.
thank
One
you.
second.
Thank you.
And
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Kumar Ramanathan, again, a gentleman of extremely high pedigree, MA Economics and IMA. He was in the global board of Vodafone. Someone who's really been who's seen the corporate world at the highest level, being the CMO of Vodafone for the region, and also a very renowned speaker. He's on the boards of Tata Group companies, as also a trustee on uh, startup educational ventures, is also part of he's still actively part of various initiatives of IIM Ahmedabad, and also works at the policy level whenever there is a requirement. And Kumar is indeed a great free thinker, one of the very few minds who can speak without any inhibitions in this subject. Someone, and of course, one thing common from both of them is passionate orators and extremely well-read and well-traveled guests whom we have. So, welcome once again, Kumar. It's indeed a pleasure and honor to have you on board.
Thanks, Divakar. That's more
Yes,
than more than an introduction I had kind of bargained for. Hope to
no,
be,
come on,
hope to
Kumar,
do
be
some
very humble.
justice.
No,
Yes,
no, sure. I mean,
thank you,
it's
Divakar.
always a pleasure.
Yeah, very nice introduction. Thank you so much for all that honor. Thank you.
No, pleasure, Keo. So now, friends, like the way we structured this conversation is I'll just spend the first very few minutes to take you through what's actually in store. I mean, why we are having this conversation. Primarily because of the new educational policy 2020, which got released a few days back, and why it is it really the kind of game changer which it is made out to be by the media or by the government? We'll just quickly run through the facts, and then let's try and get a conversation going on to what extent these will actually have an impact downstream, or would it really have an impact
I think we kind of lost Divakar.
Oh, you're there, Kumar. Yeah, I think we lost Divakar. I'm here
I think
now.
he's on a dead freeze, so
Oh,
probably he needs to re-log in. If I kind of
hmm.
yeah, he's back.
Yeah.
So Divakar, we lost you for a couple of minutes, and you're on mute.
sorry. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So quickly running through the educational system. Um The background with which this comes is this is the fourth educational national education policy. The first one was in 1968. Then we had one in 1986, which was again revised in 1992. And then we have the one in the present avatar for the year 2020. And this is the first policy for the year 2020, which aims predominantly to focus on the developmental imperatives of a developing nation and to provide a vision and a framework for both school and high school educational system. And also, we are part of we've adopted or accepted the OECD Sustainable Development Goals, and SDG 4 represents the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, where we say that India would ensure inclusive and equitable quality education and promote lifelong learning opportunities for all. So the vision provide high quality education to all, thereby making India a global knowledge superpower. So I would quickly run through the key slides without delving too much into the finer prints, because that would take a significant amount of time. So the principles of the new policy, one is to achieve foundational literacy and numeracy by all students by grade 3, to enable learners to choose their learning trajectories and programs, have a multidisciplinary and holistic education system across disciplines, emphasis on conceptual understanding and creativity and critical thinking to be nurtured, ethics and human and constitutional values like empathy, respect for others, cleanliness to be nurtured in younger purpose minds, promoting multilingualism and the power of language, and outstanding research. So each of these is an area where the policy has gone in detail and given a roadmap. So the structure is one focusing on the base level education, the primary education. Then you have the higher education, uh, covering the undergrad and master's degree. And then specific areas of focus being adult education, online, promoting Indian languages. And of course, the last part is to make it happen in terms of investment strategy, and it's more about putting the plan into action. Now, from what we otherwise know, the 10 plus 2, we have moved to a 2 plus or 3 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4. And where the system is the system is now broken into foundational, preparatory, middle, and secondary schooling. And they have their own rationale for this, saying that over 85% of a child's brain develops prior to the age of 6. So the focus is more on the kindergarten and the early nursery stage. Now, if we need to quickly move on in terms of why this is so important, if we look at it, one of the primary goals is that the kids need to stay enrolled in schools. The gross enrollment ratio for grades 6 to 8 was 90.9%, whereas for 9 to 10 and 11 to 12 was only 79 and 56% respectively. So that's an area of concern where we see nearly half of the children quitting education before they complete their schooling. So that's an area of concern for a large country like India. And yes, as we move on, the intent also is to reduce the curriculum content, because we've always known that, I mean, as kids, I'm sure most of us, or rather all of us who followed the Indian education system, are aware that we used to carry large chunks of textbooks and notebooks to school, and that used to be a load by itself. So we've been criticized for that. So there is a conscious effort to reduce curriculum content to enhance essential learning and critical thinking. And moving on, so this is a new framework where we are having 4 regulators, each for various aspects of education, be it assessing teachers, assessing students, assessing the curriculum, and more importantly, assessing the investment part. So that's something which we need to really understand whether it is relevant or otherwise for a country of this nature. And higher education, yes, this is another area where we see that we only have a handful of institutions which really make it to the top league, be it your IIMs or IITs or Indian Institute of Sciences. So the statistics here are alarming. We have about close to 1,000 universities and close to 40,000 colleges. and nearly 3 crore students in the undergrad space, and 40 lakh plus students in the post graduation space. But if you look at the and about 27 lakh students in the diploma space, so the total enrollment for higher education in India is about 3.7 crore students. This is for the year 1819. And when you look at it, the quality of it, I mean, what should I say? The real marquee institutions, what we take pride in, be it your IIMs or IITs or Indian Institute of Sciences, that would effectively have what, less than a lakh, 100,000 students. So out of 3.8 crore students, we're talking about 100,000 students or 150,000 students who would effectively be in that elite league, which is like 0.5% of the number of students who are actually studying. So uh, good level of institutional restructuring is being planned, and the aim is to increase the gross enrollment ratio in the higher education and vocational education from 26% to 50% by 2035. So this also augurs well alongside the Skill India initiative of the Prime Minister. And the other thing, what is also being consciously focused is on focusing on is the thrust on humanities and liberal arts. So something which we've been criticized of for not having in our, I mean, not having so actively present in our educational scheme of things. I think Ashoka is one of the Ashoka Kriya. These are good universities as examples in this space. Another area where we really lack uh, options is the flexibility in choosing master's programs. So the government is cognizant, and they've come up with specific regulation, I mean, recommendations in this era. Internationalization, we see a lot of Indian students traveling abroad, spending billions of foreign currency in overseas jurisdictions for sake of education. So there is tremendous interest from foreign universities to set up shop in India. So that's also been given a thrust, subject to regulatory oversight, of course. And the entire landscape of vocational education is likely to be significantly revamped. Now, this is an area of real concern. Research expenditure in India is at present at 0.69% of GDP. Whereas you look at a country like US, it's at 2.8%. Israel is at 4.3%, and South Korea is 4.2. Even China, which is not mentioned, is around 2.5%. So you look at and all the other countries which is mentioned here, their per capita GDP is like 3, 4, 5, 50 times of what Indian per capita GDP is. So we're talking about a significant amount of investment going not only in terms of proportion but also in absolute numbers per head of the population. So this is an area where the government really needs to look at, if at all we need to get anywhere close to being an intellectually independent economy. And these are the four regulators or four verticals as they call it. But yes, you have the National Higher Education Regulatory Council, the which would focus on the higher education. There would be a single point regulator for that. Then you have the Accreditation Council, which would focus on the curriculum. Then you have the Higher Education Grants Council, which would focus on financing and funding. And then the General Educational Council, which will frame the learning outcomes for higher education programs. So these are the four simplified regulators who would effectively be controlling the entire scheme of things in India. Now, this slide at least is personally very disturbing, curbing commercialization of education. So that's something definitely we would be spending some time today in terms of our conversation with our guests today. And the other areas of focus as per this policy, one is on professional education. So that's an area where the government, I mean, the country has actually done very well in terms of modularizing its professional education, but we still are nowhere compared to where the developed civilizations are in this space. Adult education and lifelong learning, personal experience, we've had um LTAP, which is a government's learning portal, where you get free courses of professors from IITs and IIMs offering structured courses literally free. I mean, these are like intense courses, and anyone can get yourself enrolled and get certified. So that's something which augurs well for the lifelong learning initiative of the government and adult education. So promotion of Indian language and languages, arts and culture. This has been a constant criticism of the present dispensation over what has been ignored. And the country has been losing over 220 languages we've lost in the last 50 years alone. And the UNESCO has declared 197 languages as Indian languages as endangered. So consciously, there is an effort being made to protect and preserve Indian culture. And we also had this case for multilingual accommodation where education could be taught in different regional languages. As you're aware, India is a country which is split on the base of language by and large. So language affinity is fairly fervent in most parts of the country. So Hindi being the national language uh, is not a mandate for the mode is not the only language based on which education is to be dispensed. After loads of political deliberation, at present, if we notice, flexibility is given to states to devise their curriculum in their own regional languages. There is Hindi is not thrusted upon. Even the option of having foreign languages is now being made available under the new curriculum. Online and digital education, something which has really taken off thanks to COVID. These numbers might look, I mean, these could be the daily enrollment. These are the numbers as of 2016 in terms of number of users using online system. Today, we're talking about millions and millions of users using this space at this point in time. So, to make these, the government is strengthening the Central Advisory Board of Education for financing. Yes, the government is likely to spend uh, close to about 3% of its GDP, which is about 6 lakh crores. And only around 10.6% of total government spending. So that's like when you look at 1920 on the total budgeted expenditure, roughly about 10% goes towards education. Uh, there is a requirement to expand this, and the center and the states will work to increase the allocation from 3 to 6%. But this is a problem because education is a not-for-profit scheme, and when you look at the overall scheme of things, India still lags the developed nations by half. I mean, we are where we just spend half of what the developed economies spend. That's something which we need to really focus and see how allocations can be made. But in years like these things look really tough in terms of making it happen. That's where the public-private partnerships should really be fostered to make this sector more lucrative for private investments in the space. Yes, friends. So this is the background, and with these, the quick wrap of what's happened here, I think let's move on. Yes. Now, Kumar, you are from India. You are still very much in the region. What is your first impression looking at, and of course, your daughter is also in the cusp of moving from, I mean, she just moved to higher education. What is the immediate feel you get on reading this educational policy from vertical to horizontal, or does it actually make sense?
Thanks, Divakar. See, most of what I'm going to say is really not going to be, see, I don't have too much expertise from the policy part of education and its impact on any downstream activity. A lot of what I would have to say are primarily my thoughts coming from business, coming from management, and some association with the higher education, institutes of higher education. So primarily fixated around output and how does the output stay relevant. So I'm going to have a fair amount of views around that. But before I actually embark on that, I think the point you made, I think one thing I want to really draw upon and then set the context of the new policy, which is the three policies prior to this, right? I think very important is to really understand two aspects to that, which actually govern the thinking of the government. One is what is the vision of the society, right, at that point in time? And in conjunction with that, the purpose of education. So you really, 1968 was early stages, not too much to draw upon, but if you ask me in single sentence, it was about universal access to education of children under 13, right? It's very simple. It was not
Okay.
really having beyond a overall societal context of, building a social fabric by bringing a lot more children into education. There are very little, or at least I don't know much, I haven't read much. But I think if you really look at the next installment, which is 1986, and then the subsequent change in 1992,
Hmm.
very important. I think if you really look at, one overall context is most world economies at that time were largely local. The world was less connected. So most activities were very governed by your own geographies. Now,
Hmm.
so that is an overriding principle, and within that, the societal context was that we had a lot of people who had access challenges, right? Because of
Hmm.
the classes and class, and the various, you can call it economic, social, cultural divides. So the government's policy at that time, primarily governed by the larger economic play in the world of being very local, was also about eliminating these differences in access. So this is the primary consideration set. However, if you now look at the latest one in 2020, I think this is the most defining thing. So from an intent, I think it's a phenomenal change, because what we are now talking about is the world is one global village.
Hmm.
We are now really talking about skilling people, relevant skills, and our workforce being relevant to the larger global marketplace. Basically, you're presupposing in an interconnected world. Now, this highlights two things, right? Obviously, it talks about skills, a skill-based learning. It talks about critical thinking, analytical learning, tools, techniques, and all of that. It moves away from form to inquiry. Correct. So,
Get
from
it.
an intent, I think it is we couldn't have got it better in terms of what we want to achieve. So, in that sense, I think it is right there. Now, here are
Get
my takeaways or key challenges as I see, right?
it. Kumar, we'll come to the challenges in a bit. We'll
So
just
this is
start
the
off with the,
context in which I look at the
yes.
policy, right? Against that,
Okay.
I think is well intentioned, right? Structured.
Nice. So, KO, as someone who's seen different curriculums, KO, in operation, now, one, we are moving toward, at least the intent, as Kumar mentioned, is in a developmental development oriented learning. I mean, given your experience, is which we're not here to debate whether it is right or wrong. How would you rate the thought process or the curriculum prescribed or the approach vis-a-vis the Western models of learning? Are we there, or we're still in the primitive stages of development, or where they were some 20, 30 years back?
Yes, Divakar, thank you. Uh, I think I see this as a very, very positive document. The philosophy and the principles by which this has been developed very much aligns with globalization, and more specifically in the education space. It very much aligns with what we see in the West, whether it's Finland, whether it's Canada, whether it's United States. It's moving towards, as Kumar mentioned, inquiry-based learning, self-reflection, rather than rote delivery of a curriculum where the teacher tries to cram in the maximum amount of content during her 45-minute lessons, uh, where students are not really encouraged to apply the knowledge, but rather just rote memorization and learning. Uh, the policy document really takes this very far ahead. The intentions are excellent. The principles laid out is super. And it really encourages a student, from a student's perspective, to bring the best out of himself or herself, aligning with their own natural talent and interest, and not just a prescribed set of lessons which are thrust upon you and you're tested upon uh, these tests that you need to pass in order to be certified or granted a graduation certificate. So this really lays out very well the principles of really learning as well as a love for learning. And I see that as a very, very positive change. I was pleasantly
Right.
surprised that the government came up with something so nice. Obviously, they've been advised well, and there's been various people that put this through together, and it's obviously based upon the latest research as well as very validated research. Uh, so I see this as a very, very positive thing in like one simple sentence. There's no questions in my.
Right. Now, I mean, with the intent behind us, now comes the question of implementation. I think that's an area where traditionally we as a nation have had to face a lot of bottlenecks, primarily because of the way we are structured or for whatever reason. Now, one of the requests, which or one of the highlights of this policy document itself, is the fact that the fund allocation towards education in a country like India is at least 50% lower than what it is supposed to be. And philosophically, we believe that education is a service in this nation and you should not profit from that. Now, when healthcare as an industry can make money, why not education? Now, without having a profit intent, is it possible to attract large private sector investments? KO, to start with you, you've been an educational entrepreneur yourself. Your family is also into large scale philanthropy in different forms. How would you view the fact that education has to be a non for profit venture in India?
Devaka, that's a very nice question. In my when I reflect, everybody needs to be motivated to perform well. So what's your motivation? It's different for different people, and even one's own motivation changes over time. If you're starting out your career, you want to make a good living, and then when you reach that good living, then you aspire for greater wealth, and then you look for avenues to reach it. And so that individual's motivation is always to do better for himself. I see that even if one is operating in a non-profit environment, you don't see Jesus Christ running schools. That there is no Jesus Christ running schools. There is people who are trying to reach their goal. Whether they are able to reach it or not, that's a different issue. And even if you've seen, even when you say there is profit or non-profit, you need a surplus in order to reinvest, in order to grow, and then you need to attract good teachers, and teachers have their own motivations, right? They need to meet their own expenses. They need better salaries than what is strictly possible from government, non-profit situation. So I don't think profit is a bad thing. I think profit encourages people to perform well, but I do think that these sectors do need regulation, which whether it's healthcare or education, you can't have it just do whatever you feel like and do whatever, charge whatever prices you want. I mean that'll abuse the system.
True.
But having said that, within a regulatory framework where you're not measured only on profit, but you're also measured on qualitative outcomes. So if you have a school that's qualitatively horrible, but you're making a lot of money, I don't think that serves society. But if you have an organization that sort of like a balanced scorecard, or in the West, they're developing what they call sustainability reporting, where it's not just your balance sheet and your P&L, but there's also qualitative outcomes that need to be considered. I think that will force entrepreneurs to be good, not just at making money, but also serving society well. So I think it's more so than focusing only on the profit part and trying to judge that no, we should not have profit. Let's be non-profit. I think you should. I think you can encourage entrepreneurs to be more balanced, scorecard oriented, where you're serving society, not just making money. And if you give an entrepreneur the right motivations, they'll strive to get it because that's what drives them. So I think it's a good thing, but change the reporting, change the requirements, and then hold people accountable for that. But don't say do anything but don't make profit. I mean that's defeating. I think that really defeats the purpose.
Get it. Kumar, now sitting on the boards, especially of institutions of eminence, as well as on schools here in India, what generally happens when the intent is not to make money? What drives the boards here?
See, Diwakar, I think the way I will look at it is I like to call any of these enterprise, right? And any enterprise needs resources. I think if you don't have resources, you cannot build an enterprise, right? As Keo said, it is about surpluses. We are not talking about extraordinary, pecuniary profits. That's not really within the realm of this conversation, right? Basically, you need resources. Now, resources can be private capital or obviously generated by government. Now, the kind of, and both as an economy, as a society, and and education and its role in the context of this, all of it is at an inflection point. Now you need, so it depends on the stage of, as we call it, right, the stage of business you're in or the stage of society. So if you're at an inflection point, you need resources to drive that force multiplier, correct? So I truly believe that I am saying, so if government were to take this as a priority, there are going to be too many challenges. Now, let's give some simple things, right? So regulation comes in. Now, what is the role of regulation? I am just drawing upon my own experience. I come from a highly regulated industry, right? Telecom, like financial services, is one of the deeply regulated industries. Now, what is the problem with, so what's the role of a regulator? Now, it's very clear. A regulator there's two sides to that coin, and the regulator has to play both the sides to keep the balance intact. On one side is about making sure economic concentration does not happen. On another, you're really about trying to kind of encourage businesses towards larger economic growth, right? So if there is no overall health, and overall health is determined by availability of resource, there is no health to the industry. Now you cannot fund it. So I really think that is not a bad word. Now let us just step out to make some comparisons. There are 50 universities in United States which have an endowment of $1 billion or more. Now, in each of these, I have to draw, I'm going to give you a real example, and I mentioned this to you last time I met. My alumnus would probably be, if some of the past guys were to contribute, we could contribute pretty healthily. We have just about put together 100 crore kind of a fund, which I told you, right? 100 crore corpus for an institute like IIM Ahmedabad. Now that too, the new generation is now. Can you just imagine the order of magnitude? I think we suffer even in IIMs from lack of good research. Now that we'll come to later. Now the point I'm making is a top university spends $160,000 is the data I read per year per student is the amount of investment the top schools in US make. Now, can you imagine if you don't have the resource, what will you invest in the students? I'm not talking about just the cream, right? The elite. So now there is obviously a pyramid. So if it is not 160,000, you have to invest somewhat, maybe 50,000 equal. So the point I'm making is resources absolutely essential. Regulation has to play a role to enable it along with managing concentration, right? So everything depending on public capital to drive, this is not necessarily the right thing. But at the same time, I have to tell you, I am the biggest beneficiary of government completely funding, because I have to tell you, I paid for my education, not even a token for what I've been able to get as a benefit, right? So I'm a big beneficiary. But if you have to ask me, cross my heart, this is a change that needs to happen.
Get it, get it, get it. I mean, unfortunately, somewhere emotions play a larger part in policy vis-a-vis practical considerations. Now, one area where you actually touched upon was research. Now, that's an area where we are significantly underfunded. And what was actually shocking to see about 2 years back, the government pulled back the benefit, which was a tax incentive which was available for research expenses. So we had a weighted reduction of anywhere between 150 to 200% on research spends. And that was actually reduced to 100% 2 years back because there was some levels of abuse. Now, we all know that consequent to that, what's happening is we are still an importer of technology. So, Kumar, let me start off with you. Since you've worked with large institute corporations, what is a thrust which is required to make India a net exporter of brains or technology instead of being a net spender on royalty? What does it take, especially a change in the educational system, for us to get to even start looking at research as a possibility of earning revenue rather than, and we are actually securing our future through research rather than focusing on, even now if we see the vocational jobs are still to skilling the population, not to actually making them in the cutting edge league. So where is this new policy driving us in that direction, or we still left wanting in that space?
Well, so Divakar, like everything else, the truth is the rubber hits the road is when you will see, right? It all kind of boils down to implementation. But I am kind of quite optimistic and pretty much on lines of what KO mentioned as well. And my optimism comes from this, right? Now, for example, if in our lifetime, in my lifetime, if we were to hope that India will become like we will have universities of top universities, institutions of learning, like let's say University of Chicago, they have 90 Nobel laureates, correct? It's not going to happen in our lifetime. Now, those kind of monies. Now, money gets research. Now, they are paid definitely, compared to professors, they get paid more, but it's nowhere near private enterprise. All right. Now, however, I am cautiously optimistic for this reason. I see there are two paths. There is a path of real institutes and things of higher learning funded by cutting edge research capability, outstanding teachers, right? And this becomes a self fulfilling prophecy. Now, we are quite some distance away from that. Where I feel little optimistic about is that there will be a, so I'm going to come to that in a minute because, I'm going to link this to the top 8 to 9, 10 kind of capabilities and skills the world is looking for. And I will talk about it. You have to give me a couple of minutes to explain what I have to say. The point really is that a lot of the world will look for skill-based capability, right? Which are a bulwark. It is not necessarily going to be based on outstanding fundamental research. You know what I mean? I'm just making a distinction. So I see hope there. Now, here is why. Now, world is an interconnected place. I define the current context as we are in an instrumented, intelligent, interconnected world, right? So now, simple. We have by 2020 50 billion connected devices. So we are instrument, right? 3.5. So information at the press of a button. Now, I want to draw upon this because knowledge will not be at premium. And I'm leading this to something else. So I told you this again sometime earlier. So I saw this very interesting talk by Nicholas Negroponte, who's a bit of a, who's in my opinion, who ran MIT labs for a long period of time, had clairvoyance to talk about touch in 70s, talked about driverless cars, and when he was 75, he was asked what's his next big prediction. He says no premium on knowledge. You put a chip in your body or you press a button, knowledge will be available. So the premium will really be in application. So now that gets manifested in some of the capabilities, right? Today you look at design, you look at programming. Now things like architecture, Now, all the old world things are slowly taking a back seat and more. So, because machines are going to do a whole lot better than what humans being did. But the premium will be about where you bring that capability on top of what a machine can do, which is skill based. Now, to my mind, the whole world will open up with opportunities there. If we can kind of find those capabilities, right? Uh, Hopefully we have some opportunity coming there because the whole world, everybody is shooting in the dark. Now, if you look at the S&P data, 24 years was a company to stay in the top S&P 500 was the average life. By 2024, the life is scheduled to become 14 years. Now, what does it mean? Companies come, companies go into oblivion. So people need to reskill themselves, right? 3 times in their lifetime. So anybody, if our system encourages the ability to fail, ability to learn new skills, then we have a great opportunity. It doesn't matter if we have a huge disadvantage from starting point.
Get it. Nice. Thanks, Kumar. Okay, your thoughts, KO?
Uh, the, uh, the, the, can you focus me the question again so that I
Yes.
focus?
So the issue was about expenditure and focus on research.
Yeah.
Because India, as a nation, we hardly spend 0.6% of our GDP on research. Whereas you look at countries like China or US or South Korea for that matter, they spend 4 times that number. Israel spends 4.3%. So, and by not spending much on research and focusing more on skill, we are still at the lower ebb of the value chain. So there is a significant level of high quality knowledge imports which we still do, despite being considered to be a country of brains. Now, today it's not about brain drain, but it's more an underutilization of the intellectual capacity which we have in house. Now, is the education system contributing to this? And is the new system in any way going to solve this issue?
Well, and thank you. Uh, there's two parts to that. One is what can an institution do for you as a researcher in that context? What can an institution do for you? And what can you as an individual do towards research? There's two different parts to that fascinating dilemma. Uh, if you look in the US, you see that much of the research is being done by Indians or even working in the high-tech companies. It's all mostly Indians. But in the US, you have a much better platform for conducting the research or taking to market a software that you develop. So those things happen much better in a place like the US. But when you look at the actual who's doing the research, by and large, I mean, Indians are very successful in doing that. So I think with the new education policy, it will encourage much greater creativity from our side. And, by and large, Indians are much more efficient for whatever reason, maybe less resources, we waste less, we're more mindful of every dollar we spend. So I do think that in US, if you needed to spend $100,000 to do something, you give the average Indian, he could probably do that same thing in like $40,000 or $50,000, or even less. Just the fact that he's just much more conscious of wastage and things like that. So the policy is helping us to develop and grow. That's the national education policy, the new policy. But at the same time, do we have the institutions in place that support it? There, India is less than what's available in the West. For example, you take this Siri technology that we use in the Apple phones. Actually, that this organization called SRI, it is it's on the stock exchange. It's a purely a research organization on the stock exchange. Okay, and Apple licenses technology from them, and that's why they call it Siri. and a lot of other people can go and license technology from a purely research-based organization. And this research-based organization, they only license, they don't sell anything to the public. They license to Apple or Samsung or whatever. So there is dedicated organizations that somehow have an economic model that allows them to prosper based upon pure research. Okay.
Get it.
Yeah, so we don't have that in India to that extent. That where you have a public company that lives on being able to sell their research findings or the products they create out of research. We don't have that in India. Yeah.
Get it.
But having said that, I think there's something called pure research, and then there is applied research. In our schools, in our organizations, we are very conscious about investing in applied research because because we're a private organization that doesn't get incentive for very long drawn out technology development. The economic model does not allow us to hire scientists to do pure research. But having said that, there is a great opportunity to do applied research because there's so many apps coming out now. What's the best apps to use for our students, and what are the learning outcomes if you use those apps, and what are the best apps to teach multilingual students? So all this kind of applied research can definitely be done with, I would say, relatively modest budgets, but as long as you have the mindset to do it. But the old education policy really doesn't need any of that because they prescribe the curriculum, they prescribe the lessons, they prescribe chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 10, and then you're tested on that. So you're not tested on creativity or ingenuity. You're tested purely on your ability to remember what your teacher taught you, right? So I think it's positive in that sense, but I think Indians generally are more efficient with how they spend their money, So if we can somehow combine that, I think India will be a big winner. I know that India is developing very much, but I think it'll get better over time as well.
I think staying outside India, the optimism levels are far higher than those from within the country. But yes. Now, getting back to the way the knowledge is getting dispensed, one real challenge which we have faced in India is the inability to access quality teaching skills. That's where, I mean, as much as we put the curriculum in place, we build the school infrastructure. I mean, a student is as good as the teacher. So, now with the fact that online is now being widely accepted as a medium, now, is there a case where classrooms can effective not work study from home, but assuming things are getting better post COVID, especially in the government schools, classrooms can be made digital where you don't need to have access to local talent, but still you will have great teachers living in cities teaching students in the villages. Is that a reality which is likely to happen, or is it actually happening elsewhere in your perspective? Kumar, to start with you.
So the my take on that, I think at least that company which I'm associated with, which does funding for standalone middle schools. The problem is physical infrastructure is a huge problem. I'm just saying basic availability. So now today, if you now were to look at it in conjunction with, let's say, the largest part of the government budget is still nearly 25% of the overall education outlay goes into midday meal schemes, almost, give or take. Now that is, I'm just saying it really is about at a core level, where are things falling apart? So infrastructure, in my opinion, has got quite a distance to go. And without that physicality, I don't think virtual systems and structures can quickly fill in. So, because you will agree with me that a core physical capability or structure is essential before a virtual environment can really take over. So, that is one part. Now, you address a very important point saying that, look, you don't need to have physical teachers who are trained good enough in, let us say, in Kolar to come and teach. You can get a good teacher who is doing it in Bangalore. Now, obviously, I'm saying that the content could be there, but the pedagogy and all of that needs calibration, right? The concept of educate, the language, how it is modularized, how it is delivered. I think KO is a better person who can fill on all the details in terms of challenges. But I also feel with the little we have looked at, and including, in the city school, that is still a problem. I don't think we have been able to break that. But will it happen? I think it will happen. I think where I see the problem is in the bottom layers of the pyramid at primary, at the, what they call the ECC layer, right? The early childhood care,
Yes.
in the 5+3 kind of stage of education, I see that problem.
But that's where they say 85% of the brain development happens.
Exactly.
Scary.
That's true.
Happens at that. Your thoughts, KO, on that?
Yeah, well, I, I, I can speak with reference to my own context. I'll speak that first,
Yes.
and then I'll try to address the larger context. So from our context, especially now with this COVID situation, we have had or we are forced to really experiment with remote learning. Be it teachers based in Kuwait reaching out to students based in their own home, or even we have teachers from India teaching our students here in Kuwait. For example, we've just set up a digital music school where we teach any kind of instrument to students, but the teachers are based in India. And when we were setting up this school, we really had wanted to bring the teachers to Kuwait and then, use our school and our students and start teaching. But then once COVID happens, no flights, visas are a difficulty issue. They're forcing expats to leave. And then we were forced to, let's say, experiment or, deliver the service in ways that we did not really, were not so ready before. But having said that, we're seeing good uptake from the teachers that we have digitally based in India, teaching students here. My inference is, the actual education, or rather the knowledge delivery, that can absolutely be done in a remote manner. Okay. The bigger issue is, what is the user experience? Are children sufficiently engaged? What if you are not sufficiently engaged? What age group are you? For example, it's hard to digitally teach kindergarten kids, because kindergarten kids, their attention span is not so great, and they want to play, they want to move, and that's very natural at that age. So that's not the age for e-learning. But when you have, when the kids get older, definitely content can be transferred digitally. That's not an issue. I think the real issue is, I think kids love coming to school and playing with their friends. So I don't see school as a place where they come just because they're going to learn something. They really come for that social interaction, playing with friends, the emotional development. But the actual content, whether it's done in school, whether it's done remotely, that can be managed through multiple channels, physically or virtually. So of course, when all of us now, we are used to physically doing it, and so we can read the body language that a child is interested or is losing attention. But virtually, how do you do that? If he's not paying attention, or if he's not engaged in the lesson, how do you track it? How do you monitor it? I think so. It's really a practical implementation issue. But I do think this is where one can really do the applied research. That's what we try to do. What are the parameters for what are the KPIs or parameters for the user experience and the success digitally? How do we measure? So we need to really with those kind of parameters that will give us an indication that yes, we're doing the right things. And then we might come up with things that say, okay, don't have lessons more than 20 minutes. It's pointless because you're losing kids the last 20 minutes. And every 20 minutes, take a 10-minute break and come back. So you need to really experiment and see what's working and what's not working, but you have to be very conscious about that kind of, I would call it applied research, So,
Get it.
yeah. So now, how does that, in the context of Kumar's inferences, where the digital infrastructure in the Indian government schools is not good, or maybe to a large extent in India, I think there's opportunities there to solve that problem. And how can one solve it? Yeah, if the government policy says, okay, we can come in and provide the technology and earn a service fee for doing that. Okay, I'm sure there will be enough funds or private equity coming in and say, okay, we'll set up the complete digital infrastructure for the schools, and we will earn 10 rupees per usage per day, or whatever it is. And then entrepreneurs will solve the problem of money if you can open up the regulation for them. And if you can do that, you will attract money. People will find a way to make money and provide the service, because that's what the whole challenge of entrepreneurship is. So I think it's sad today that we say that we cannot attract money. The only time you cannot attract money is if you cannot give a decent return to whoever is supplying your capital. That's the only time that you cannot attract money. But if you can provide a decent return to who's going to give you capital, you will attract money if you're supported with a good business model.
I mean, it's unfortunate because education seems to be the largest opportunity in India, and unfortunately, because of regulatory constraints, we're not able to attract investment.
Yeah. So when you say don't be for profit, the only thing you're saying is that let everybody make money except the guy who provides capital, right? Other than that, let everybody else make money. That's what you're saying. Why is that guy singled out?
I mean, somewhere. I mean, that it's too political if we had to comment on that, but yes, that's where it is. And so, which is why the focus on educational business is now to see how to make money within the constraints rather than legitimately making money. So, we are unnecessarily creating colors of money ourselves by these regulations. But now, Gabe, just taking a cue from what you said in terms of where we are adapting to the digital medium. So, let's assume this becomes a way of life going forward. We already see that many of the commercial institutions say 25% is or 50% is going to become the work from home norm, primarily to reduce the cost and the dependency on physical infrastructure. Would school effectively become a thing of the past, or at least would that be an aggregation or a congregation for people with common interest to come and explore their additional interests rather than coming there for primary learning? Is that something which you envisage physical schools to evolve over time?
I think schools will always be there, more so after this coronavirus pandemic. I mean, there's only so much you want to do sitting in your own home. We're social creatures by the way that we are built. Our Almighty has made us such that we need people and we need social interactions, right? Even as one gets older, you will see, when even older people, they need the social interaction, and that's what drives them. You can serve them less food, say no drinks, that's all fine, they can live with it. But the minute you say that no interaction with other people, that's the real killer for most people. The same thing applies for students. We all want the social interaction. We want to play, we want to argue, we want to fight, we want to disagree. That's all part of our social being. But if the choice was to sit at home and learn, only acquire knowledge, learning by yourself, I don't see that happening at all, not by a long shot.
Get it. So
been more reinforced it more. Before coronavirus, you had an aspiration that, I can learn at home even if I don't want to go to school. But after coronavirus, it's like, it's the exact opposite. Even if I can learn, I don't want to learn at home, I want to go to school. That's the situation. Yeah.
Your thoughts, Kumar, on this?
No, I'm very, very optimistic. I'm pretty much on exactly what Keo said. And, my point is going a little further. I think if the whole world is going to pay a premium on critical thinking and doing, right, it is very important as a methodology. Hearing and reading are one aspects to education and progress and learning. Touch, feel, conversation, debate, right, interactions, uh, fosters a lot more. And obviously, it is pivoted around us being social animals. And so, learning is far, far more accelerated if this were to happen. Which is why, if anything else, the need for physicality, I believe, gets far more pronounced than before.
Get it. Nice, nice. I think we've just passed our time. We've got a few questions. I thought we'll just take one question from the group which has been WhatsApp to me. Now, do we see vocational education gaining prominence over regular education, mainstream subjects, given the fact that so much of emphasis is being made on developing additional, or working on talents? Post COVID, is vocational learning going to be the forefront and mainstream learning going to take a back seat? Uh, Keo, your thoughts on?
I think vocational learning will become more prominent, especially in the digital learning, computer coding and all that, and plus many other things, because the but I don't see mainstream education taking a back seat. I don't see that at all. But I do see that we have the ability as human beings to focus where we want to learn and sort of access that directly and faster, more efficiently, rather than learning a lot of things that we might be forced to learn, but not necessary for our talent, our interest, or for the job that we're seeing. So I think that there's going to be a greater rationalization in wastage and more towards what you really need to learn, what you like to learn, what you need to learn for a particular job. So in that sense, the vocational and the applied education will take more prominent, or it's a more efficient pathway to meeting one's goal or aspirations. But I don't see that at the expense of primary education or school education. It could be more in higher education. There would be a more efficient way to get to what you want to do. But I don't see that as being in the lower grades. No. Yeah.
And let's take one more question, Kumar. I thought this will be of relevance given your experience, Kumar. Do you see companies hiring more for talent, skill rather than qualification going forward?
100%, right? So, to me, so see, today we are in a huge era of disruption, right? So technology, behavior are changing far more rapidly than even what the companies can imagine and can deal with, in my opinion. The second fundamental change is that I think, just speaking on the point, on the earlier question, I think slowly but steadily, the era of generalists will kind of, the value for generalists will diminish and the value for specialists will get enhanced significantly. Third is that if knowledge obsolescence is real and skill obsolescence is real, what you're basically saying is the cycles are getting short. Now, all companies and individuals need to take cognizance of this, in my opinion. So to answer, you definitely need the premium will be placed on specialists, and specialists will come on the back of skills. Now, education obviously will have to give you a platform. It is like saying, good, I know the language, but to have a good grammar, the grammar would have the premium.
Get it, get it. Nice, well said. So I think that actually Cleo opens up taking from what Kumar said, a massive opportunity on upskilling qualified population. Yes, I think
Yes.
that's going. That industry is really going to boom, and we're already seeing that happen. Yes, nice.
Yeah, we have tied up with some service providers in India to provide vocational uh, teaching and learning through a digital platform. So
Okay,
we're moving into that. We see that as very necessary.
okay, okay. Nice, nice. So, gentlemen, I think with these few words, I just thought let's call it curtains for the day. We just passed our time by 6 minutes, but it was indeed very absorbing in terms of listening to your thoughts, given your background and how you look at the world shape up. We all hope things fall in place and whatever the government proposes gets implemented in its right it and reaches a larger population. And your concluding thoughts on this before we formally call it quits. Kumar, to start with you.
So I think for everybody here, that's the mantra I keep telling. I probably repeat myself here. I think knowledge skill obsolescence is real. Employment is not one linear curve. Please be prepared to unlearn, relearn, and these are the new realities, right? The if you fail, fail soon, fail big. So there is a premium to do that.
Nice, nice. Always extremely well said. KO, your thoughts?
My thoughts, there's a lot of opportunities ahead of us, especially with the new education policy. A lot of opportunities, so one has to grab it, one has to see what one can execute successfully. Anytime there is a change in anything, that's when opportunities give rise to uh, new entrants or participants or people who are adaptable and flexible and deliver. So I say look for opportunities because of new education policy. I see plenty from my perspective. So that's what I feel.
Nice. So one from an entrepreneur and the other more from an educational from a free thinker's perspective. Thank you, gentlemen, for your time and your thoughts. It was, as always, a pleasure interacting and catching up with you. Hope to
Thank you.
catch up soon on another conversation. Thank you.
Thanks, Divakar. Lovely to virtually meet you, KO. Hope to run into you sometime.
Okay, Kumar. Thank you so much. Divakar, thank you for that. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.